Hello, Void. How are you doing? Got a lot to discuss today, so I'm going to just begin and talk about, first off, the convoluted history of the Lawnmower Man, as well as my convoluted history with the Lawnmower Man. Now, this is a movie I had thought I had seen for many years, but just because of how generally familiar I was with it, I had believed I had seen it. Now, Lawnmower Man came out in 1992, but we're just gonna fast forward a few years ahead of that, when I was but a young lad, somewhere, I can't remember exactly when, but it would have been after 96, so I was somewhere 12, 13 maybe, hanging out with the boys, chilling overnight at one of their places, and we had rented a bunch of movies, and Lawnmower Man 2 was one of them. Now, before then, I hadn't seen the original. But one of my friends was particularly into it, so we watched it, and I'll be honest, I don't even remember much about it other than the cyber warfare aspect. And I thought it was fine, but they were all more into it than me, but I generally got the gist of it, and they've also said the first one was better. Okay. And also, I was familiar with the imagery, particularly the weird digital man there from it, from several video game magazines, because several video games had been made on the Lawnmower Man. But I never actually saw it at the time. Fast forward several years later to a high school aged, 50 or so, when I was reading and ingesting everything Stephen King related. And I read many of his novels, but they took me a long time to get through. They were quite dense, so I more was drawn to the short story aspects. And one of them was The Lawnmower Man. Now, that title rang some bells, jumped out at me. But reading it, it clearly had nothing to do with the movie Lawnmower Man. But it's such a distinct title, I thought it was a weird coincidence. That one's more about a moving lawnmower, a guy eating grass, and weird sexual aspects of it. It's a strange story. And something about the great god Pan. I don't really remember much about it now. This is a long time ago for Tony. But, well, again, moved along. And finally, in one of my movie binges, picked up a copy and saw it, and realized, yeah, I never actually saw it, but I was familiar enough with the plotline. So, that's my own convoluted history. Lawnmower Man itself has a convoluted history. Now, I mentioned the Stephen King story in my own tirade. Now, that's because technically there is a Stephen King connection. Sort of. Or at least there was supposed to be, but then there wasn't. Let me explain. Now, the studio, uh, which studio is this? New Line, I think? Or Allied Vision Productions. I don't know which studio owned it, but one of them had bought the rights to Stephen King's story, The Lawnmower Man. But they also owned a script called Cyber God, and decided to kind of merge the two. And to the point where they pretty much made Cyber God. Just the fact that they had a guy using a lawnmower through a lot of it. And they kept one character in, as well as the shop, which appears in a couple of their Stephen King properties, mostly the movies. I don't know about the books. Like, it appears in Firestarter, the movie. Don't know about the book. I didn't read that one. But the Lawnmower Man story was nothing virtual reality, and this movie is almost entirely about virtual reality. So, naturally, Stephen King was not happy about that. Especially since they began marketing it as Stephen King, it's the Lawnmower Man, because Stephen King's name sells movies. Well, in this case, Stephen King won a lawsuit to get his name taken off of it. And I can see why he wouldn't want to be associated with the thing, mostly because this is not his story. quality of the movie aside, and I don't think he objected to the movie itself, just being associated with something that wasn't his. Now, I will say I do like the title The Lawnmower Man. It's evocative and seemingly kind of random, particularly for the type of story this is. But it's not Stephen King's The Lawnmower Man. Now, let's actually get into talking about the movie, shall we? So, plot of this one is there's a scientist working on virtual reality to try to boost intelligence, as well as essentially using video games and virtual reality to enhance intelligence, and is doing animal experimentation, and particularly with a monkey or chimpanzee. Now, the company that's backing him wants military applications, and so it's been mostly like a soldier program. And eventually, said monkey breaks out, grabs a gun, and starts shooting people. This movie's kind of silly at times. I'm not gonna lie, but kind of adds something. Now, his project gets shut down. He leaves it. He doesn't. They want to keep trying with this. He doesn't want to play any part of it. So he pretty much just does what he can to start experimenting on his own. Meanwhile, there's a mentally handicapped neighbor of his who essentially lives in the back of the churchyard in a sort of a makeshift shack there. He works as with a gardening company as a lawnmower, hence the Lawnmower Man. And he's a simple guy, friendly enough, but he gets picked on by the neighborhood bullies. I guess it keeps the concept of Stephen King bullies around. But, and he's just kind of generally harassed. He's abused by the priest who looks after him. He's not in a good position. So, scientist, played by Pierce Brosnan, offers to, hey, if you want, then you like playing video games, right? I've got some video games that might help make you smarter, if you want. And so he begins this experimental treatment to see about enhancing his intelligence. And it begins working. It begins working very well. So, as Job, the Lawnmower Man, and his intelligence grows, he wants to experience more and more things. And with the success that the scientist, Dr. Angelo, is having, he's invited back into his project and begins to work with Job there to keep enhancing. But he unlocks more and more things, including Job starts having unforeseen side effects, including, well, first enhanced confidence and ability to interact. But then he starts being able to, well, hear what people are thinking, being able to move things with his mind. Things that were quite unexpected. He views it as tapping into things that were long forgotten. However, the company wants, again, its military applications and trades the new drug that he's been using for the old drug, which enhances aggression, and wants to see what that's going to do to Job. With predictable results of him going on a power trip. Culminating with him determining to having become to the point where he can manipulate people's minds, telekinetically control things. He seeks revenge on all his enemies, and then is determined to upload his consciousness into the computer mainframe to become a new cyber Christ to usher in man's future into the virtual reality world. Yeah. Like you do. However, Dr. Angelo realizes things have gone too far, and Job is out of control, particularly because of the new aggression factor, as he's able to disintegrate people with his mind. And, well, is determined to keep Job from either uploading himself, or if he does, lock him down so he can't escape to the net at large and take control of everything. Now, what works well in this movie? A lot, actually. The character of Job is really well realized, and they play him as simple, but they do a good job of not making it cartoonish or particularly offensive. And they do a good job having him gradually become more and more intelligent. And once he seeks his revenge, it's clearly he's reached a breaking point in himself. So, now, the effects are a mixed bag. Technically, they look terrible, but that actually works for the movie. Because this movie is set, well, in 92. So, and there's a lot of CG, but it's because they're in a virtual world. They're essentially, it's a video game screen that they're looking at. So, of course it looks fakey. Particularly since it was 92. So, we can completely let that slide. So, a lot of the dodgy digital effects are kind of supposed to look like that. Even Job's cyber avatar, yeah, it looks fakey. But it's in the confines of a computer world, so it's supposed to look computer generated. So I'm fine with that. That is okay. Most of the effects, therefore, I can write off as they work. There's one I'm not sure about. Now, when he's on his revenge tirade, goes after the bully, goes after this abusive husband of his neighbor, because because he was friends with the kid who lived there. He goes after the priest. Now, the priest he lights on fire with his mind. But the fire is CG. I'm not sure if that was supposed to be him actually lighting him on fire or using a weird virtual fire to burn him. Because like he before was causing people to virtually discorporate. I can write that one off. But I'm not sure if the fire was supposed to be. So I'm not sure on that one. I'm gonna assume it's supposed to look like virtual fire and just give it a pass. That was a little weird. Now, can't really talk about this movie without the elephant in the room of the cyber rape scene. If you've seen this movie, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen this movie, well, I guess I should explain. Now, I have some problems with this scene, but not the problems of the content. Now, it's more an awkward execution that I actually have some questions on. Because within the confines of the story, the progression of that does make sense. Now, as he's getting more intelligence, he's also taking better care of himself as he learns how to, so he's becoming pretty good in shape. And one of the people he mows the lawns for is a promiscuous young lady she's flirted with many people throughout it, including him. Now he's finally smart enough to realize it, and, well, they start having a bit of a thing. Okay, we're fine there. So, at one point, as he is getting more intelligent, him and her are becoming more of a legitimate couple. Could be just more of some fun on her end, but he decides to, well, it's just after he gets the aggression drug, so that's the first sign that there's going to be some trouble. And he takes her to, you want to try something unique. And he takes her to the lab and plugs her into the virtual reality machine. She's into it so far. No problem. He plugs himself into another one, so they begin to have this virtual sex. It's really tripped out and psychedelic. It would be explicit if it wasn't so weird looking. Like their characters look like liquid people melding together. It's weird looking. However, it gets to a point where it's starting to stress her mind, and it manifests in the screen as her being kind of like tied down, and she begins to want him to stop, and he refuses to. I believe, then it's portrayed as kind of he's losing control because of the aggression drugs that he's now on. So he continues, and essentially because he keeps pushing her too far into this, he pretty much shorts out her mind. So, yes, it's a skeezy scene, but It does work also because this is the first time he did go too far with something, and it was something he didn't mean to go too far with. He just lost control for the first time. And it's after this he really starts his downward spiral, particularly as he starts mainlining the drug more and more, which puts him into this full, almost supervillain status of revenge seeking. Now, then afterwards takes her back, and the next time you see her, she's just kind of laying there laughing to herself because she's suffered a mental break. Now, yes, it's some questionable material, but I'm fine with it in the context of this story. What I don't actually get is how this whole scene ended up happening. Now, this is a paramilitary top secret facility. Job is he's the test subject. How did the test subject get the ability to just walk into a very secure lab? They've always shown a lot of security. There's a big armored gate out front. There's a security guard on the way. The lab is key coded. How was he able to just walk in with his girlfriend, plug into a very expensive, one-of-a-kind machine, blow out her mind, and then proceed to leave, and nobody noticed? Nobody noticed. Most a few people comment about her not about wondering where she is in a few days after, and then later she's found wandering the streets naked, laughing and everyone assumes it's because of the night of carnage that just happened. But no one realized he just did that at this very secure facility. Little problem there. Now, overall, I like the film. It's dated, sure, but it's a fun kind of dated. It's definitely a time capsule of early 90s, what can computers do kind of film. And the character of Job is really well realized and should be an iconic sci-fi villain. Villain might not be the right term. He's a complex character. I mean, it's not his fault he ends up the way he does. And even then, he still seems to have somewhat of his humanity, as when everything's going on, he still wants to make sure that the kid who he's friends with is safe, even willing to try to put himself in danger to do so. But there's definitely some triggering scenes, and definitely some questionable material between. It does deal with a mentally handicapped man, and like I said, the cyber rape. So not for everyone, but overall, particularly how it wraps up, does kind of have some chilling implications. None of which are, of course, explored in the sequel. They seem to ignore the last half hour of this movie for the sequel. Yeah. But this one, it's not the greatest, but for me, it's sort of iconic. So I'm giving it a solid 3 MacGuffins. I recommend it. If nothing else, it's a good sci-fi flick. Lawnmower Man. Recommend. Have a good night.